When you walk onto a job site, there is just this overwhelming sense of control.
Right. You've got the stamped structural plans, the heavy machinery.
Yeah, exactly. You've got this highly engineered critical path schedule, and it really feels like you are practically defying gravity, bending physical materials to your absolute will.
But the thing is, gravity is incredibly patient.
Yeah.
It is always pulling. And the moment that engineered control slips, even for just a fraction of a second, the consequences are immediate. The physics take over, and, well, they are entirely unforgiving.
They really are. And that tension, that exact tension between control and catastrophe is what we're looking at today. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are a construction business owner trying to scale your operations safely and smartly, without getting buried in the noise of the market, you are exactly where you need to be.
Absolutely.
We have a lot on the docket today. We're going to talk about the massive $4.5 billion Brent Spence Bridge update, look ahead at a surprising new EPA regulation targeting microplastics, and finish up with an emerging trend score that just shattered records.
But we do need to start with something a bit heavier today.
Right. We are starting off with a somber reality check that really demands everyone's attention. On April 8th, 2026, on Grays Ferry Avenue in Philadelphia, a 7-level parking garage under construction for the Children's Hospital, or CHOP, partially collapsed.
Yeah, and we need to treat this news with the utmost gravity because the human toll here is it's heartbreaking.
It really is.
We are talking about victims from Ironworkers Local 401. 1 worker is confirmed dead, 2 more are presumed dead, and 3 were rescued from the rubble. OSHA is currently leading an investigation into the site, and they expect that investigation to take over 6 months.
Wow, over 6 months. And looking at the preliminary reports on the Philadelphia collapse, it seems like the site was fully permitted. The general contractor is HSC Builders, and the precast subcontractor is Precast Services, Inc.
Right. All the paperwork was there.
Yeah. And, my first instinct when I hear about a concrete structure failing is to blame the materials, like maybe a bad batch of concrete or a compromised rebar cage.
Sure, that's where most people's minds go.
But the timeline of when this happened suggests this was a sequencing and erection issue. So walk me through the mechanics of what actually happens when a precast roof segment fails during placement.
Mechanically speaking, we are looking at a failure during the single most vulnerable window of any build.
Correct.
Because when you're placing precast elements, you are lifting massive multi-ton pieces of concrete through the air. And at that specific moment, the structure is not yet a unified monolithic whole.
It's just pieces.
Exactly. It's just a collection of individual pieces waiting to be permanently tied together.
Oh.
So when that roof segment dropped, it introduced a massive dynamic load to the structure below it.
I always try to visualize this progressive collapse concept like a row of heavy dominoes set up on a card table.
That's a good way to look at it.
But instead of the dominoes just knocking each other over, the sudden kinetic energy of the falling dominoes causes the table itself to give way.
Yes.
One failing element cascades down, and it instantly overloads the adjacent structural elements beneath it. Because those lower columns and floors, they're engineered to hold static resting weight, right?
Right, exactly.
And they were never designed to catch thousands of pounds of dynamic falling concrete.
That is a highly accurate visualization.
Mm-hmm.
The kinetic energy of that impact transferred directly to the floor below the roof. And because that kinetic energy vastly exceeded the floor's load capacity, that floor sheared and failed.
Oh.
Yeah, dropping its own weight plus the roof's weight onto the floor below that. It becomes this devastating chain reaction that completely outpaces any human ability to react.
So, if the erection phase is objectively the most dangerous part of structural work, how do contractors scaling their businesses protect their crews?
It comes down to protocol.
Because when schedules are tight, margins are thin, and the owner is pushing for milestones, there's just immense pressure to move fast.
There is, but proper temporary bracing and strict, unwavering adherence to connection sequencing are the absolute only lifelines you have. You simply cannot rush the sequence to make up for lost time.
Right. You can't cheat physics.
Exactly. The structure is at its absolute weakest point before all the final connections, welds, and grouting are completed. A lot of firms treat the temporary bracing plan as like a mere suggestion, but it's the only thing fighting gravity until the structure is locked in.
And identifying those vulnerabilities requires a massive amount of vigilance, especially when you are scaling from managing one site to managing 10.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is why Smart Business Automator's Market Intelligence Report monitors these exact types of job site incident patterns across the industry, highlighting how crucial it is to track safety risks proactively. You have to know where your blind spots are before gravity finds them for you.
Because a physical collapse doesn't just destroy a building, It shatters lives and it halts your entire operation. But physical physics isn't the only force that can pull a massive project down.
Right, which brings us to the physics of finance.
Yes.
A structure failing because variables weren't accounted for is tragic. A budget failing because variables weren't accounted for is how companies go under.
100%.
Let's look at the Kentucky-Ohio crossing, specifically the massive Brent Spence Bridge project. It has officially cleared its path for a spring groundbreaking.
Yeah, we covered this project briefly back in March, but the critical update today is the sheer scale of its financial footprint. The project is actively advancing, but it's doing so despite continuous compounding cost growth.
And what are we up to now?
The budget has now ballooned to an astonishing $4.5 billion.
Wow. 4.5 billion. That is just a staggering number. But I want to ground this for our listeners. Because if you are a mid-market contractor building, say a $5 million tilt-up warehouse, a $4 billion federal bridge might sound like it exists in a completely different universe.
Sure, the scale is wild.
But the mechanics of cost escalation work exactly the same way, regardless of the decimal point.
They absolutely do.
Ah.
The Brent Spence Bridge is basically a masterclass in the friction of complex timelines. You have logistics spanning 2 states, which means competing bureaucracies.
Oh, yeah.
You have multi-year environmental reviews. And over that extended timeline, the original quotes for steel, concrete, and labor become completely obsolete. When a timeline stretches out by 5 or 10 years, inflation and material volatility do not wait for your furnace to clear.
Right. A 30% overrun on a massive bridge is driven by the exact same supply chain delays and labor shortages that cause a 30% overrun on a commercial retail build.
Exactly the same.
And Smart Business Automator's Market Intelligence Report tracks this exact kind of cost escalation on mega projects in its pipeline data. It proves that even massive, federally backed infrastructure projects aren't immune to budget bloat.
No one is immune.
It shows that if you are a contractor scaling your own operations, you have to build extreme cost volatility into your initial bids.
You really have to price in the unforeseen variables. And right now, speaking of variables, the federal government is quietly brewing a massive new environmental variable that most contractors haven't budgeted a single dime for.
Oh, this is the invisible risk forming right under our feet.
Yes, it is.
On April 2nd, the EPA took a major step by adding microplastics to the Draft Contaminant Candidate List 6, or CCL6, for the very first time.
This is a monumental shift in environmental targeting. They are listing microplastics alongside established, highly regulated hazards like PFAS, the forever chemicals, as well as pharmaceuticals and disinfection byproducts.
Wow.
Yeah, this draft list covers 75 chemicals and 9 microbes, and microplastics are now sitting right there in the crosshairs.
And the public comment period for the CCL6 draft is 60 days, with finalization expected by November 17th, 2026. Now, I know the immediate reaction from anyone swinging a hammer or pouring a slab. We hear microplastics and we think of, ocean pollution or single-use water bottles.
Right. Turtles and straws.
Exactly. A contractor framing buildings is going to wonder why this matters to their bottom line.
It matters because construction is one of the largest consumers of commercial plastics, and the job site is a massive point source for runoff. The EPA isn't just looking at consumer goods anymore. They're targeting the construction supply chain directly.
What exactly are they looking at on site?
We were talking about stormwater runoff carrying site debris. We're talking about the massive volume of demolition waste. Think about the synthetic concrete fibers used for reinforcement, the miles of PVC and plastic pipes, and the rigid insulation foam that gets cut and shaved on site, sending little plastic beads flying in the wind.
Oh, yeah.
All of these have been explicitly identified as significant microplastic sources.
And there is serious capital backing this research up. The Department of Health and Human Services has launched a $144 million STONK initiative.
Right.
That stands for Science, Technology, Operational Monitoring of Plastics. When the federal government throws almost $150 million at developing monitoring protocols, enforcement is not far behind.
No, the machinery of regulation has definitely been turned on.
But let me push back on the urgency here a bit. You mentioned the CCL6 is a draft list. The trajectory of EPA regulation usually goes from a candidate list to years of funded research to a proposed rule to a final rule, and then eventually, finally, to site-level enforcement.
It's a long process, yeah.
That cycle could easily take a decade to fully roll out. So why should a busy contractor who is just trying to scale their business and survive a chaotic schedule today care about a regulation that might not generate a fine for 10 years?
Because adapting your supply chain and operational habits is not something you can just do overnight. The regulatory ship turns incredibly slowly, but the direction is permanently set. The EPA, putting this on the CCL6, is the flare going up. It means the research funding is allocated and the monitoring protocols are actively being developed. Contractors who start evaluating their plastic waste streams, their site runoff barriers, and their material sourcing right now are going to avoid a massive, expensive compliance shock down the road.
So it's about seeing the storm on the radar and fixing the roof before it actually rains.
Precisely.
If you start looking for alternatives to certain insulation foams or concrete fibers today, you build those relationships early. Then when the mandates finally drop and the rest of the industry is scrambling and driving up the prices of compliant materials, you already have your supply chain locked in.
You're already ahead of the game.
It transforms a regulatory burden into a competitive advantage.
Exactly. And staying ahead isn't just about playing defense against new regulations. It is also about playing offense, following the smart money and adapting to where the market is rapidly accelerating.
Let's talk about that market acceleration, because the numbers coming out of the search trends this week are structural shifts, not just blips. The search query prefab construction company just hit a perfect score of 100 on the Emerging Trends scanner.
Which is huge.
To put that in perspective, that is the highest score ever recorded for that sector. And this score has been sustained across the 12-month, the 3-month, and the 7-day timeframes.
And that sustained volume is the critical metric here. A 1-week spike could just be a viral news article. But a sustained 12-month perfect score means serious capital is actively flowing into off-site manufacturing.
Yeah.
And there are massive demographic shifts supporting this trend too. For instance, VA construction loans are seeing a 67,300% breakout, hitting a score of 65.
Wait, a 67,000% spike?
Yep.
That tells me we have a massive demographic of veterans actively looking to bypass the traditional, wildly inflated housing market. They don't want to buy an existing home at an inflated rate. They want to finance a new build. But with traditional site-built costs escalating, they're likely looking for efficient, predictable alternatives like prefab.
And they're utilizing advanced site tech to do it too. Construction drone services just hit a score of 75, which actually represents a cluster of 4 different search queries, including drone site photography, topographic mapping, and progress services. Owners want eyes in the sky to track every dollar of their investment.
It's a technological leap forward across the board, and Smart Business Automator's Market Intelligence Report continuously monitors these accelerating multi-source search trends so contractors know exactly where the demand is shifting long before it becomes common industry knowledge.
That's the key.
If veterans are looking to build and prefab is exploding, that is a massive pipeline for a contractor willing to adapt their business model.
And we have to weave these specific trends into the macroeconomic context of the past week too, because the scale of capital moving around right now is just fundamentally reshaping the labor pool. Engineering News Record reported on a $670 billion overall project pipeline, but within that, we are tracking a $690 billion hyperscaler AI boom.
Let's quickly define what a hyperscaler boom actually means for the mid-market contractor. Hyperscalers are massive, multi-facility data centers built by companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft to support artificial intelligence computing.
Right.
They require astronomical amounts of electricity, industrial cooling, and structural steel.
And that creates a massive localized vacuum. If a $2 billion hyperscaler data center breaks ground 50 miles from your commercial project, they're going to absorb every available commercial electrician, pipe fitter, and HVAC technician in the region.
Oh, absolutely.
They will pay premiums that smaller contractors simply cannot match. It also means local prices for things like copper wire and conduit will spike literally overnight.
So even if you are entirely focused on building a local high school or a retail complex, the hyperscaler boom is going to hit your schedule and your labor budget directly. You are competing for the exact same skilled trades.
Yeah, and on top of that private sector boom, the massive state and federal projects are still pushing forward. We saw a $6.7 billion bridge project advance in New Jersey and a $3.8 billion airport project in South Dakota.
It's a lot of money flying around.
It is. Meanwhile, Autodesk's Cloud BIM revolution is completely changing how teams collaborate on 3D models across these massive sites, pulling the industry further and further away from paper plans.
And the political and federal funding landscape is shifting just as rapidly. The fiscal year 2027 EPA budget is looking at a 52% cut, while the defense budget sits at a massive $1.5 trillion.
Wow.
We also have a series of fast-approaching deadlines that contractors really need to have on their radar. Let's see, April 16th is the Gateway Tunnel Court date. April 25th brings a new anti-DEI executive order into effect. May 20th is Spark Arc. June 1st is the estimated end of the EPA microplastics comment period we discussed.
There's just so much happening.
Right, and looming over everything is September 30th, when the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, expires.
Yeah, and the expiration of the IIJA is a massive cliff for civil and infrastructure contractors. If that federal funding spigot gets turned off or delayed, the pipeline shock will ripple down through every single tier of subcontracting.
When you look at the sheer volume of variables we've discussed today, the catastrophic physical risks of a progressive collapse, the financial risk of a $4 billion cost overrun, the invisible regulatory risks of microplastics, and the labor vacuum of a $690 billion data center boom, it is literally impossible to manage a scaling construction business on whiteboards and spreadsheets anymore.
The administrative weight alone will crush your margins.
Seriously.
As you scale from 2 projects to 10, the number of photos, daily logs, RFIs, submittals, and schedule updates doesn't just add up, it multiplies exponentially.
That is where the survival of a scaling company relies entirely on intelligent automation. Think about the hours a project manager spends just trying to write a weekly recap or dig through a folder of 500 site photos to prove a column was poured correctly.
It's a nightmare.
A platform like Smart Business Automator automatically tags, sorts, and categorizes project photos, plans, and permits based on the location and the phase of the build.
And the document intelligence is what really changes the game. Extracting the critical details from thousands of pages of specs and drawings, and then automatically checking your field data against those specs to identify compliance gaps before they become physical, expensive errors on the job site.
Exactly.
It can flag a schedule bottleneck or an RFI delay before it throws the critical path off by 3 weeks.
Utilizing an AI project assistant allows your project managers to get out of the admin weeds. They can actually manage the logistics of the project, handle a larger portfolio of jobs, and scale the business without needing to, double the administrative headcount. Technology is the only way to insulate your margins against all the external volatility we've talked about today.
Which raises an incredible strategic question.
Oh.
If we look back at that explosive Score 100 trend in prefab construction,
Yeah.
and we connect it to everything else we've dissected today, this incredible pattern emerges.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Could this massive capital-backed pivot toward off-site prefabrication be the industry's ultimate answer to multiple systemic threats? Like, by moving structural assembly into a controlled ground-level factory environment, do we eliminate the deadly erection phase risks that caused the progressive collapse in Philadelphia?
Oh.
And by managing material waste in a closed facility, do we simultaneously solve the site runoff and microplastic pollution problem that the EPA is targeting? We might be watching the industry permanently redesign how we build to survive these exact pressures.
That is exactly the kind of macro-level connection that separates the companies that successfully scale from the ones that get left behind. If you know a contractor who is trying to scale their operations while managing escalating costs and site risks, send them this deep dive. It could help them stay ahead of the next big regulatory wave and keep their crews safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hit follow on whatever app you're listening on so you don't miss tomorrow's intel.
And visit smartbusinessautomator.com to learn more.